This podcast is brought to you by Hoare Chartered Accountants. Hoare Chartered Accountants are based in Galway City and are a leading provider of audit, accountancy and taxation services. For more information, visit hoarecharteredaccountants.ie. You're welcome along to the Maroon and White pod. So it is Galway that have secured their Division 1 status for 2027 with a narrow 2-point victory over Dublin at the weekend. But just before we do that, just like to extend sympathies to all the Lyster family on the sad passing of Michael. Michael actually featured twice throughout the pod in the past. And I suppose when I texted him to come on the pod, I never thought I'd get a reply, and then he came on it twice, and it just showed everything about the man, and really enjoyed speaking with him on both occasions. Just before we get into the match, Maurice, obviously it was nearly strange in one sense when you entered the press box yesterday in Pearse Stadium. You just heard of this news straight away.
Yeah, I got summoned when I arrived and heard it. Just I think he was an emblem of an era that we all remember very fondly for the GA generally. And your anecdote there would tally with a lot of the stuff you've heard over the last couple of days about how he had a phenomenal ability to put people at ease. So, geez, he'd be sorely missed. I thought, in fairness to everybody yesterday, whether that be the team themselves in terms of what Pork said afterwards in his tribute or the way he was honoured beforehand and that kind of standing ovation. I haven't seen a tribute like that before. There was obviously a moment of silence, but there was just this, it felt nearly spontaneous outbreak of applause for him, and it kind of summed up just how fondly he will be remembered by not just by Galway, but by the country as a whole. So, yeah, I that was a very nice tribute that you paid there, and I just like to add my condolences to his wife and children.
It's fascinating when I had him on the pod. It was actually 2024, the week of Galway Armagh, before the final, and it was fascinating to hear him talk about Pork, and then it was fascinating yesterday to hear. I thought Pork's tribute yesterday after the game was just lovely, really.
That's the word, yeah. And look, he would have known him from a whole host of different factors. There's an inherent fan in all of us first, and sometimes you can forget that stuff. And that would have been, I mean, it was just an era that you would associate very fondly. It's a frankly astonishing thing that like 35 years as a working for the Sunday game is just remarkable. It is truly remarkable. So it's no surprise that he was the face of that, and as I said earlier, an era that we remember very fondly. And then just from Paul's perspective, he would have known him as a fan, he would have known him as a player, and he spoke about the All-Star trips and some of the shenanigans that would have gone on back in that era. And then obviously you would have known him as the broadcaster, and most importantly of all, I suppose, as a clubman, as somebody who lived locally. So, yeah, in fairness, I thought they honoured him particularly well yesterday. A man that would strike you as probably wouldn't want a huge fuss made of him, but it's all the more reason why I think it was very fitting that they did that yesterday.
Yeah, and again, just like to extend our sympathies to all the Leicester family on the sad passing there of Michael. Morris, Galway retain their Division 1 status, 20 points to 115 winners over Dublin. Something that's maybe got lost, I thought, was Galway's first victory over Dublin in Pearse Stadium since 2009.
Yeah, we had a particularly bad record against Dublin for a whole host of different reasons. Actually, what I was, 2000, ironically, 24 was kind of the outlier in terms of that performance. But even the last league meeting in Pearse Stadium was it was a particularly one-sided affair, and definitely for a bunch of different reasons, Paul, in terms of that record against Dublin, and also in terms of you want to make Sawtell into a bit of a fortress now that you're looking at potentially five home games in a row now. So to kick that run off with a hard fought victory will have done them no means of end. They've had some very good performances away from home this year, and probably saved some of their worst performances for Sawtell. Or so yeah, to kick it off with a win with a right good crowd inside in there, and building towards a kind of semi final at home, and potentially if you get over that and Mayo win the other one, you're looking at a kind of final in Sawtell. So that it was a proper note to kickstart what is going to be a fairly pivotal run for them.
How important do you think yesterday's win is for Galway for the 2026 season?
Uh, it's important for a couple of different reasons, not only for the 2026 season. I thought it was interesting that park reference. There's things that we don't talk about publicly for obvious reasons in the GA, and one of those would be, because it's a boring topic to a lot of people, is maybe gate receipts and what comes if you think about it, Paul. There was 6,000 people at the Galway Roscommon game. There's nearly 10,000 there yesterday. There was over 10,000, I think, for the Mayo game. With the greatest respect in the world to the opposition that would come from Division Two, I don't think you're getting anywhere close to those crowds. And let's say conservatively, you take half that 10,000 people off those combined three and extrapolate that over gate receipts, and the figure you come up with there is a fairly substantial one. And that would be a big hit from a Galway perspective if you were to go down to Division Two. So, for that reason alone, I think it was important to stay in Division One. From a footballing perspective, I think you don't want to be relegated because of the bit of a cloud that comes around that. And despite the fact that it's been referenced a lot that two teams in the last couple of years have won All Ireland's out of Division Two, it still isn't an ideal note to go into your championship with. So it's not necessarily ideal. And it's funny that people keep referencing that quote, but what actually happened to those teams the year they were relegated is another matter entirely. So I do think it was important to stay in Division One. I think it was important to Galway give out 10 debuts in this league. That's a substantial enough number. And some lads have really stuck their hands up at a bit of competition in positions that will definitely do them no harm as good. So, job done, box ticked in terms of what they actually would have wanted to get out of the league.
In terms of the home record there, I know you referenced it, but obviously losing to Mayo, the circumstances, they obviously lost to Roscommon, only having the three home games and before the championship starts. Obviously, really important to get a victory at home.
100%, yeah. And like I said, it's not a guarantee, but there's a realistic chance that they're looking at a kind of semi-final at home. Mayo beat Roscommon a kind of final at home. That's not a guarantee, far from it, but it's a possibility. And then you end up in a provincial final. That means you're at home in this new championship format, and you win that, you've got a 50-50 chance of your second game being at home. So that run is massive for their season. What's coming down the tracks now will define so much of it, and it's a particularly important thing. They would typically move into the stadium to do a bit of training, and I know a couple of years ago they actually turned one of the dressing rooms into a gym so they could train out of there from that sense as well, and just to develop a bit of a fortress around Sawtill, and for that to be where you plant your flag. No, you've got to win, and it's not something nice to build on ahead of, as I say, a fairly crucial run.
In fairness, like 8 points to finish with in Division One, it's quite a, I suppose, high number of points to finish with. But considering where they finished in the table and finishing on 8 points, it's positive enough, you'd have to say.
It is positive, and especially in the context of the circumstances they were dealt with. Every team is dealing with stuff. I appreciate that. You've got some teams are dealing with injuries. Kerry have lads coming back late from a All Ireland club run. Roscommon have a similar thing with their club lads. Donegal have the hangover of a particularly bruising All Ireland final. But Galway had their own, you know, they did have their own baggage over the end of last year. And I think there was its general sense, maybe, especially, I don't know about you, but you would have encountered it locally. I said this the last time we spoke as well, that maybe people were felt a bit frustrated at how last year finished, and you were kind of conscious to see you didn't want to see that, you don't want to see that mood kind of settle for too long, and you want to give reason to get back on board and get behind the team who fully deserving the public support and have been a top tier contender for a long time now and are four-time Connacht champions. And they've given people enough cause to do that again. They've proven they're going nowhere. They've introduced a couple of new faces, which is always an encouraging thing. Like I said, there's a bit of depth there now that probably wasn't there last year. So they did a lot of the things that you wanted, that people would have asked of them from this run. And I think that you saw kind of a fitting the crowd. They had reason to get behind them now, definitely on Sunday, particularly given what happened at half time. And you definitely got a sense that the crowd that was there was in Galway's corner, and that is a tangible thing. That there's countless evidence that that is a very decisive thing. So to get that sense there and something to build towards now for a championship is a very encouraging thing.
It really did feel like a championship game yesterday, didn't it? Like even Rob Finnerty referenced it in his post-match yesterday after he was awarded TG Carr man of the match. But even as that game went on, particularly where I was sitting anyways, you could see there was more and more Galway supporters getting up off their seats as this game went on.
Yeah, two teams fighting for their lives. Like both teams came to make sure that they were trying to avoid relegation. I don't think If there was any other circumstances, I don't think Dublin would have included Conor Callan as late as they did and brought him on involved. And it looked very easy to say in hindsight, was that the right decision to do? Did he look ready essentially in that game? It's hard to say. So they came to stay up, and regardless of how they speak about it now, that was their ambition from it. And similarly, Galway, they absolutely knew they needed to get a win, and they came for that. And definitely at halftime, you would have been is apprehensive too strong, but you were looking at it and saying, poor start now, 5 points down at home. Uh, Two of your most important players in Matthew Cheney and Sean Kelly gone off injured. That's not to mention the lads who are missing as well away from that. So at that point, you were starting to think, okay, this is a right test. But again, in fairness to this team, they just have a phenomenal ability to dig in when they need to and produce some really courageous acts down the straight to dig it out.
If we look at the game and the start, obviously Dublin come out of the traps race into a 4 point lead after 3 minutes. Then they go 5-2 up after 8 minutes, and then Bugler gets another one 6-2. It was hard not to be slightly worried at the start, particularly the way Dublin were shooting in those opening stages.
It was, yeah, and a lot of things a lot of fires to be putting out at once there now. I mean, I look down. I have to say, I mean, I was 5 minutes into this game, I was absolutely buzzing because I thought you had two teams more or less going toe to toe, and you had seismic matchups all over the pitch. I mean, this game starts and Liam Silk is running towards Sean Bogler, and John Maher and Paddy O'Coffer Burner hopping off each other, and Owen Merchant is trying to get right in close to Robert Finnery, and you're looking at this. This is we've got some really good showdowns here, traditional showdowns, I suppose, is what you would call it, and a whole host of very exciting reasons to keep an eye on all of it. And then Dublin start the way they did, and geez, I thought Galway were poor now at the start, but that's not to take away from Dublin. They were really slick with the start from it's 15 seconds into the game starts, and Sean Bugler kicks the two, and then they're just really starting to come with a flow, and they only kicked one wide during that half. And just Paddy Small goes off injured and doesn't knock a stride out of him. So definitely at that time we were thinking, Galway need something here. And in fairness to them, I thought it was, and again, it was their leaders who stood up when the game was going against them. It was John Maher just came with some seismic runs. He had an amazing. He was nearly bottled up in the corner at one stage, hand passed the ball kind of on the ground, back out and around. Ball came back to him. He took on Paddy O'Coffer-Byrne, won a free, just a tap over for Rob Finnerty. Now you stem the tide slightly. A couple of their, Dylan McHugh started driving up the wing as he typically does, and Dublin definitely struggled to deal with that. So despite the fact that I thought their attack was, I think they'd be frustrated maybe at how pedestrian they were at times, and but
Particularly only three from play, and even the penalty comes off Connery skying it ultimately.
yeah, and I think it's part of it is that, you know, to be honest, I thought maybe there was something coming. We were going to see when I saw the way Galway were attacking and the amount of players they had outside the arc. I thought, are they trying to create something here? And then you're thinking about Roach inside. And in fairness, they did actually. Oisin McDonough's two-pointer came from a kick to Roach when he started inside and was breaking out to a wing, and Nathan Doran just ended up pulling back his shoulder. So you were wondering, were they going to try and create a couple of situations like that? But yeah, Portray said it himself afterwards that there was something they had clearly worked on since the Monaghan game, but there's more work to do in it. And I do think Galway have a mean defence now. The goalkeeper is looking at stronger again. It'll be an interesting decision to come there. The area to work on over the next couple of weeks will be their attack, and some of that will be dictated by personnel. But nevertheless, I think you can be reasonably confident that's something that they'll put a whole host of time into ahead of a Connacht Championship campaign.
Would have been a great move if it came off when they pressed Dublin in the opening period and in the build-up. There was some great build-up play by Matthew Tierney and Dylan McHugh. The ball finds its way to Ryan Roach. His shots ultimately saved by Hugh O'Sullivan, but I thought it was a really impressive move there.
Yeah, that was really slick, that entire passage. And look, I think Roach did a damn fine job yesterday. He was clearly asked to do a role. I think in a situation like that, you nearly have more time than you realize, if you know what I mean. Like you'd actually, by snapping the shot, if you had, can you imagine? The thing that was in my head is if Rob Finney's in that situation, you know what he's doing. He's turning on the right, and he's that little dance skip dummy, and he's back onto the left, and uh, you've got a defender who's dived and he's overcommitted. But even still, they managed to salvage something from it. That was, yeah, and that's a fair point. I mean, at times they still did string some nice moves together. Even some, they when Robert, no, sorry, Matthew Tierney got injured. He had a tackle by Paddy Coffey Byrne that Galway management were particularly unhappy about at the time. But you think about that, like you're attacking for a long period there with 10v11, and they worked the ball over and back. Tierney is lying. He's clearly unable to do anything. And eventually Sean McKern does a lovely little dummy run in behind, ball's popped inside him, first time shot on his right foot, and it goes over. That was, in the context of a set attack, kind of that slow player, that was pretty slick. So it wasn't particularly poor or anything like that, but it could definitely be better. And it is something I think that they'll put a lot of time into now.
Trailing 12-7 at the break, Finnerty misses the penalty before the break. Arguably could have had another one after that, but I don't think Fergal Kelly is probably going to give Galway two penalties in a row there. But
I watched this game back today. I think the stream, I got my hands on a different video now, but I think the TV clock was off for that. And what actually happened was the hooter sounded as Finnerty was standing over the kick. And the rule with the hooter is you take the shot, but whatever happens after is done. And that's why there was
okay,
no penalty. So I think the game was finished. The shot happened, they raced in the break, but that the hooter had sounded, and obviously Fergal Kelly doesn't have to blow his whistle because the hooter had gone. So because if you watch the end of that passage, he doesn't do anything. Even when the ball goes over the line, he's standing there. So from what I'm just guessing now from watching it, but you can definitely hear the hooter sound before he kicks the ball. And I think in the new rule with previously, as we all know, that hooter rule would have played out until the play was over. But it's hooter sounds, and if you've got a free kick, it's the go for the score and nothing else. Penalty, similar thing. So I think what happened in that situation was penalty was saved. The game is over. So that's why, because it's such a blatantly obviously penalty, it kind of would make sense that that was the explanation anyway.
um, just on the halftime shenanigans, obviously, there's there's a bit going on between the players. Obviously, Keane Brannock McGinn and Ger Brennan obviously um, get involved, and like it's all carrying over, I suppose, from maybe the Dublin players saying something to Rob Finnerty after he misses the penalty. What did you make of this? Because I found in the moment when all that happened, it was just even at that moment hard to know what to make of it.
It was a bit mortifying to be honest. I thought really, and probably not. I think everybody involved will look back with a bit of regret for obvious reasons, and maybe got carried away. And there definitely was a part of you looking down and like on one side you've got children here around, and the other side you have adults getting ready to play their mini games. Like this isn't the way it's supposed to happen. It's you don't want to be too head and low-joy about this stuff, but the fact it's happening literally meters from where kids are getting ready to play at half time is not great, really. So I think everybody involved will definitely have a regret of it. I think, and you can accuse me of overplaying this, it had a seismic impact on Dublin, in my opinion. An absolutely seismic impact. You go back to, yeah, that Dayton Drawn conceded the 2 point free, but it was a particularly harsh free. You compare their discipline in the second half versus their first half, it was light years different. You compare their composure in the first half versus their second half. Dublin had one wide in the first half, they had eight in the second half, and these are not difficult shots. They were from scoreable zones, let's say, and they're from players who, it's not their inexperienced lads who are taking these shots. That you're talking about Conor Callan and Brian Howard and Kieran Kilkenny. So yeah, I think it had a huge impact on Dublin actually. But yeah, as for the incident itself, I'd say everybody involved will, yeah, I will wish it didn't happen. And in fairness to the two of them, like after what happened half time, they came out and shook hands and no complaints about their red cards. And I think that's probably the only thing that you can do in a situation like that.
Yeah, quite funny to see both of them waiting and talking to each other
For Kelly, yeah, yeah,
before he came over.
yeah. Were you surprised Dublin came out first?
Yeah, it's actually a good point. Um,
I was stunned. I have to say, I just assumed that what was in my head there was Dublin need to know what is happening in Armagh, obviously. And after Row gives you a perfect excuse to you take your damn time there. And if you've got who was the linesman on that side? Brendan Griffin from Kerry, I think. If he's banging on the door, you ignore him and you take your slap on the wrist. But you take your time and then you come out and there'll be the whole rigmarole about dealing with all of it anyway. And sure you could buy yourself halftime could have been 25 minutes if they wanted, and then you would definitely know what you needed at the end of the game, what's happening in Armagh. But they came out first. I was just surprised at that. Now, when I was sitting
Yeah.
there, my initial reaction when I was sitting there was thinking Dublin would take an absolutely age here, and they would have been right to. That I know you shouldn't promote this stuff, but look, this is the reality of what the situation here. So I was a bit surprised, all right, that they didn't milk that for what they could have.
Do you think there's a bang coming for Keane Brown, McGinn, and Joe Brennan?
My colleague John Fogarty was writing about this today that it actually might not be as severe as people would. What I know, what's in people's heads maybe is Dave Fitzgerald and Jason Ford, isn't it? That's the one
Yeah.
that'll be, people will associate with that. But John, a damn good journalist, did some legwork on this, and there is a separate rule for with an opposing mentor as opposed to a player. So in that alone, the fact that I think Jared Brennan, to talk there is that it might only be a one game ban rather than a seismic, a multi-week type of thing. So they probably will get something for it, yeah. But I don't think it will be as severe as maybe people might have assumed in the moment.
Um, we're a good bit into the podcast now, and it feels strange in one sense that I haven't mentioned Robert Finnerty's name that much. 8 points yesterday. I know I asked you a question a couple of weeks ago, was he underrated? But is it now he's only starting to get this media attention that he is, but starting to become obviously Galway's main man in attack? But do you feel it's now he's only getting the credit he deserves?
See, it's funny. My instinct is to defend my industry and my tribe and to say that we've always appreciated Robert Ferry and there's an understanding there. But you can make a case that he had a very strong contender for an All-Star last year and he didn't get one. And was that maybe a bit of a punishment for a not appreciation for what happened in Galway games last year, or the fact that the lads were there at the same time as well. So I think Robert Finley since 2024 on has been Galway's most important forward. There's no denying that, and he proved it again at the weekend why that's the case. He's just he's such a difficult player to stop. I mean, I know people, you can be very critical of Owen Merchant, but Owen Merchant is a very good player, and it is just so hard when a guy is now two-footed as Robert Finnerty is, has that kind of daint movement that he does. He's getting a lot cleverer with his movement, I think. I typically before Rob Finley would hook very wide in the corner. He's actually getting central more. And when you get on the ball there and you got 2 feet, it is a nightmare to stop a guy like that. So yeah, he's evolving. He's getting better, which is very encouraging. I thought that Paul Joyce told us after it was an interesting conversation that he went over to Robert Finley at half time to say, "Are you all right?" Basically, with missing the penalty and the whole thing that came after. And according to him, Robert Finley said, "Yeah, fine, just keep feeding me the ball." What a great attitude, and that's the ultimately the only thing you ask of players in a game, in any game, is you can't expect them to be flawless. Like, they're going to make mistakes, but it's how you respond to those mistakes which is particularly important. And geez, he was sensational down the straight, and I was particularly fitting that it was his two-pointer that ended up winning them the game. I've seen him, and you would have too, obviously, with Sawtell. I mean, that corner is his corner for Sawtell. He has it down to a fine art, and when he got the ball in his hands, you were thinking this. The shark is in the water here, lads. You've got to get. I mean, this at all costs. Don't let him do what he did. But Dublin didn't react to it quickly enough, and he drank what ultimately proved to be the winner.
Did you see when he was pushing Merchant and he was trying to push
That
him
was
over the line to break to breach?
Yeah, that was a bit. Geez, like a bit kind of ridiculous by everybody involved. But look, this is a game like that is funny, Paul. I mean, you ultimately you go to a game and people have different, just people like me, kind of nerdy, who are looking at the game in a certain way, and then there's other people who just want a bit of crack around it, and there's some people who just want to just highlight scores. And a game like that, you got all of it. You got everything. You got rows and penalties and a super goal and high pressing and a lot of other things that you want to see in a game like that. So the full theatre of Gaelic football was involved in that game, and you even had a bit of circus element, which was what happened in half time, and certainly what happened between between Merchant and Finnery in that case.
Is Finnerty Galway's best player now?
He's damn close, yeah. He's damn close. I think it's an interesting conversation because I Sean Kelly's importance to Galway is seismic, in my opinion. John Maher, I cannot completely appreciate why they appointed him to be captain, but there's more depth in those positions, if you know what I mean, than there is as a strict inside forward scoring option. Like he's starting beside two rookies, two lads who are still in their debut seasons in Dublin on Sunday. So there's a lot more on his shoulders than there is in other cases. And if he's not there, the drop off is fairly stark. So in that context, I think he's certainly from the weekend. He was Galway's most important player. I'd say he's, as all of us are, he's really anticipating getting Matthew Thompson back because his addition to centre forward and what he just looking for that kick inside and the relationship that they already have previously will be huge as well. So, but yeah, in the context of that game, it'd be very hard to argue with that statement.
Looking at the second half, Dublin obviously go 114 to 12 up ahead of Galway on 54 minutes. O'Flaherty gets a point, it goes 114 to 13. But even from trailing from five, Galway obviously go there and outscore Dublin 8 points to one. It was just, I suppose, the decisive factor in that game, really.
Yeah, so well, two decisive factors for me. The first thing, the only my slight concern for Galway to me is there's a lot of you're looking back on what exactly went wrong last year, and one consistent issue which I definitely wouldn't have anticipated last year was they were fairly routinely turned over coming out with the ball. So if you go back to the Dublin Galway game last year, which was a big blow for Galway and a massive fill up for Dublin, the moment that changed that game is Liam Tilke's coming out and Conor Callaghan turned him over. Was there a pushing back or not? But got some pressure on from that. They won a short kick out, got turned over, high up the pitch. You're uber exposed, the goal. And same thing happened again for the Johnny McGrath's coming out with the ball and he's just swallowed. And Dublin break really quick fast. And Colin Callan feeds Killian McGuinness, who was outstanding now, in fairness. He was absolutely excellent for Dublin. And he took his goal really well. So that has happened a couple of times, particularly unfortunately to Johnny McGrath, who's a tiger and has been is back. I think is playing well in the last couple of games. But similar thing happened against Meath as well. When I don't know if you remember that kick out to the corner and Jody Morris got in. So you part of me kind of hopes that I don't know that's not a it doesn't infiltrate your confidence and you still have you got to have the ability to work that ball out short and. I presume you're going to come to it later, but you've got a guy like Keane Hernan carrying the ball out there, which is a massive addition. So that's your slight concern. To your question, in terms of the thing that changed the game for me was the red card. There's no getting away from it. It is so hard in the. Hugh O'Sullivan is a good goalkeeper, but you're not only are you down to 14, you've lost your main target, and there's no surprise that Galway end up kicking six scores, 7 points if you include Rob's 2 pointer down the straight there when Patrick Crawford Byrne is off the pitch. It's just it's really hard to manage that. So to be honest, when I saw that red card, I think this game is only going one way because it's trying to live in the context of the rules in that is just so difficult.
What about your own clubmate, Keane Hernan, in that last quarter? Like, just immense.
I'm glad you said it, not me. He was outstanding. He was absolutely outstanding. I think there's nobody in the county that doesn't know the ability that Keane has. It's fair to say, and particularly in that context of coming forward. And I have to say, I was surprised. Keane Hernan didn't have his best day against Dublin in the championship last year, fair enough, but I still think a lot of people would know his ability. I was very surprised at the freedom he was given down that straight there. I know you're down to 14 players, but in the context of there's a fairly significant threat there left in a whole lot of space, and that's the guy that you kind of need to especially after you watch the first point he kicked, just get after him. But look, Galway were very clever with how they balanced that red card and made the most of the extra man. And the second point he kicked was borderline hilarious. I mean, it was 20 meters over the bar. It was so high that I think a lot of people, particularly in the press box alongside me, were thinking, "Oh, he scuffed that." But yeah, he was absolutely terrific. I thought he was. I know the 2 points came at the end. I thought he was very good. He'd one mistake early on, but other than that, he was very good throughout the game as well. And he's had a really good league, especially in that context of just coming up with big plays, getting up the pitch. He could have had 2-2 against Monaghan last week. Scored a great goal against Kerry. So yeah, that was a major plus, and it was very telling to me just how delighted Port Royce was, particularly about that, because you can tell the faith they have in him.
I'm right in saying Hernan didn't feature against Armagh. I don't think
He,
did. He play midfield. Yeah, he didn't come on against Armagh. He played midfield obviously against Mayo and then didn't feature at all. Didn't even come on as a sub. Like to show that response and to go into full back shows a lot of character, and particularly when obviously he's on Erasmus before this, and we all know he comes back, then obviously breaks the wrist that time, which was such a cruel injury because he was cementing his place. It feels like he's been there for quite a while, but this is probably one of the first years he's just getting that consistent run in the team.
100%. That's the point for me, Paul, is that um look, I take your point about the Mayo game coming out. The only thing I'd say is he was in America and he was playing football, but he wasn't playing consistent senior football. So he went out to Galway Boston, won a championship, but it's not the same, it's not comparable to playing senior club
Mm.
football even here. So he actually hadn't played a huge amount of football. And even like last year, he did a single second pain and nicked a hamstring against UL and came off in that game as well. So just to get a run of games was really important for someone like that, in my opinion. And he has had that now, and you're seeing the benefit of it. So at times he still has that maybe the capability to produce a mistake that I'm sure drives management a bit daft, and you want to keep that high focus there for the entire game. But you just see the raw potential that he has and his ability to break a line, and he actually has come up with some big defensive plays as well. It probably went under the radar slightly, the job he did on David Clifford in Tralee that day, but it was as good as American job as anyone has done on that man in the league so far. Another player who's just in that unmarkable category. So yeah, for me, I think I it's been a steadily improving, but that is only inevitable when you get kind of that consistent run of games, and there's a bit of a back in there. And yeah, there's still probably a debate about his actual position, but in terms of his value to the team, I think that's decided now.
This episode is sponsored by DroneWorks Ireland, your go-to place when it comes to buying a drone, repairing a drone, and also when you need professionals to carry out any aerial work you may need. Check out their website at www.droneworksireland.ie. They're obviously going to be pleased with the impact from the bench yesterday. Daniel O'Flaherty, Liam O'Connell all chipping in with scores. More minutes into Paul Conroy again. They'll have to be happy with the impact the bench yesterday.
Do you think is Paul Conroy getting a raw deal from referees since he came back? Gee, to me, he's been fouled on a fair few kickouts in the last couple of games that is just ignored basically. And he came on against Roscommon. There was a bit of a set two, and he got booked that day as well. So a bit surprised at that one. I definitely thought he was fouled for the one just beneath us. It was on the press box side for the game yesterday, and there was one against Monaghan where it was obvious he was running down towards the ball and his heels were clipped, and
There was one yesterday where he was held. I forget which Dublin player it
it
was.
was O'Coffey Byrne, I think,
Yeah,
just
he
after he
tried
came on.
to
Yeah.
shrug
Yeah.
himself and even went to look to the ref. I was surprised he didn't get a free there.
Anyway, that's an aside, really. Yeah, they'll be absolutely delighted with the impact. Sean McKern came in and did a really good job
Yeah, I forgot to mention
yesterday.
him.
Really good job. Took his point really well, but went about it defensively particularly well. They've got very good options there, and it probably didn't work out the way that someone like Kieran Mulroy would have hoped, but that's the inevitable thing with this game is that when you have the options that you do and they get somebody in there early, and it was a lot for, in fairness, like it was a lot for that sideline to deal with yesterday in terms of you're trying to weigh up the decision of who's coming in for Cameron, and then you get two injuries to two very important players in a quick span of time as well, and the game isn't going the way that you would have wanted either. So I thought they managed all of that really well. I think they got everyone changed that they needed to make right. A lot of us wouldn't have anticipated Roach starting the game, and he, as I said earlier, he came in and did his job, hit the mark that he needed to hit. So I'd say that was a quietly they'll be very happy with how they managed that, because when the game starts as messy as it does, there's a temptation to for your brain to scramble, but they did what they needed to, and they managed that very well.
Are you seeing a different side of a coaching impact to this Galway team this year? Because obviously Galligan's came in. We're 2 years now with Graham and David Morris coaching as well. Are you beginning to see anything different with Galway?
There is a question. I so I, the honest answer is that I think last year was a whole lot of flux for a whole lot of teams in the context of the new rules, and it was inevitable that a lot of teams were going to take some time to react to that. Galway were ahead of the curve in a lot of ways, especially in the league last year, particularly before the 12 v 11 change, and then obviously things have shooken up a bit since. But I would say, yeah, I think they're defensively they know exactly what they're trying to do, and they're a very smart defense. I think their attack probably isn't where they want it to be. How much of that is down to coaching and how much of that is down to personnel? I think a lot of it would actually be the latter. I think, in fairness, how they've managed their track record for. I don't know what you think, and I'd be curious to hear it. I mean, I look at that Dublin team in terms of the actual 15 that was on the pitch yesterday, and regardless of the talk about them or where they are, that 15 were good enough to win that game. Like absolutely, there was enough talent on the pitch to. But and so to my mind, the issue there is they're not hitting their potential. And maybe they're not good enough to win on Ireland, but the team they had out on the pitch, especially when Galway had the two injuries, was good enough to win the game. And there's a fair few players there underperforming, in my opinion. Galway have an amazing ability to get good, solid players in and elevate them. And we've seen that again with the likes of Shane McGrath or a whole host of debutants who've come in recently. I know Shane McDonagh, as it strikes me as a guy who's only going to get better and better from the exposure that he has in there. So I think that would be a huge fit up for them, is that a lot of lads came in and they did their job. They performed to exactly what you would need. And then you've got that late punch coming with. I mean, it's the second game in a row now where Paul Conroy's coming, and he's just such a huge 2 point threat. And eventually, teams are going to cop that, and they're going to realise we have to get after that, and he'll have to adapt to that too. But currently, it's a very hard thing to stop. You're seeing it's 3 2 pointers in 2 games from two cameo appearances is not a bad return.
Obviously, haven't mentioned the injuries yet. Matthew Tierney goes off injured. From what it seemed like a dead leg. Sean Kelly goes off injured. Didn't want to risk him. Sean Fitzgerald misses yesterday. Damien Comer, Shane Walsh, Killy McDade. Is it a worry if all of these players or most of these players aren't back for the Connacht semi-final?
No, it's not to me. Uh, the reality of elite level sport is there's wear and tear. You're going to have injuries. You can't expect to have a clean bill of health at any stretch. It's the unfortunate reality. And Paul, again, like I think the wrong lessons were learned from a lot of last year. But the lesson for me of Kerry it's particularly complicated, and there'll be a lot of talk about it for the year. But they just got on with it. What was in front of them, it didn't matter. So they could absolutely have gone into an Ireland final and said, well, we're without our best defender in Thomas Sullivan, we're out our two best midfielders, in terms of the two injuries that they had there, without our third best forward in Paul Ganey, and they didn't knock a stride out of them. They just you assume that and you get on with it, and I think that's what Galway have done really well now, and they're not pining after anybody. Now that's not to say that when those lads are back and fit and available, they won't come back in, because they have enough credit in the bank to do that. But no, I wouldn't be up in arms or panicking if they're not all back for a Connacht semi-final. I think ultimately the task of every team now is just you have to get on with it. There's no use pining over. I'd say Mayo would be fairly worried about some of their Conor Loftus and the Hessian, from what I hear, in terms of their involvement for a Connacht championship. But you just can't. There's no future in pining after it or waiting for lads to come back. You just have to put the head down and keep going.
Obviously, players management aren't going to be thinking of any of that in the injuries. It's obviously just going to be next man up. And in fairness, that's the way poor choice has always been about any of these injuries. But for ourselves and for supporters, is it hard to I suppose be thinking, what if we had these players?
Yeah, it is hard. For me, to be honest, the hardest thing is thinking about it from the lads. And look, you don't want to go psychologically analyzing anybody, but from the lads themselves' perspective, like it's been torturous enough run from injuries for a few of those lads that you've referenced there, and you would just love to see them get a proper run and show the country what they're capable of. So that definitely is a party that would feel very sorry for them that they haven't been able to get the run that would undoubtedly show their talents. But to your point, yeah, I can totally appreciate why supporters are looking at it and saying, "Oh, if only we had." Actually, this is what you do. When you win, you strategize about how great you got everything. When you lose, you pine after what didn't go right or who's not there. And that's always the case. But I do think, to go back to your point that you said earlier, Bart Joyce deserves a lot of credit. And I've said this to you before. Like he gets kind of bizarre criticism for it sometimes, but the only thing he can say in this situation is exactly what he says, which is that the lads that are there right now are doing what we need them to do, and we can't. Because can you imagine the message it would send if you're saying we just so desperately need these lads back? So his messaging on that is right, but at the same time, I completely appreciate why supporters are. are frustrated, and even the lack of information I'd say is driving supporters daft. Like what exactly is their injuries? How long are they supposed to be out? But as we've learned over the last couple of years, this stuff is complex, and you just have to ultimately get back to it, get on with it.
Uh, Last week, Barry Cullinan obviously picked the Galway football team for this Connacht semi-final based on the players available. I'm not sure did everyone maybe read that on the caption because the abuse, the abuse flying in on that team was something else, but it was based on the players available there. So I don't know if you see the team, but what do you make of it?
So the Fitzy thing is I in the task that Barry had for the context of it, yeah, I
Yeah.
think it was fair enough. I think this stuff is more fluid than the likes of myself can sometimes pretend it would be, and it will be dictated by opposition and personnel. To me, so there are definitely games I think where defensively they would benefit from having a Sean Fitzgerald at three. I think Keane Hernan is a pocket knife for Galway. Like Keane Hernan came back from an Erasmus against Westmeath and played wing forward that day.
Mm.
He's been talked a lot about. I mean, Barnett played him midfield, half back, wing forward. He's played in the full back line in the last couple of games. He actually did it against Dublin as well last year. So that's a guy that can play 2 to 15. He'd slot in wherever you need him, basically. And I'd say there's a future where he might be asked to do exactly that. And they have a couple of guys, even I don't know about you. I was looking at the starting team yesterday and I was saying, who is McDonagh, Finnerty, and who is going to be inside here? I
Yeah.
couldn't work it out. And in fairness, I didn't see the Roach call coming. But as I say, he did his job. So in that context, yeah, I think I wouldn't I wouldn't have too many complaints with Barry's team. I certainly wasn't one of those people weighing in with abuse anyway.
Yeah. Who do you think is going to be keeper?
Um, right now, Conor Farty's in pole position for me. I think he's done exceptionally well in the last two games. The big thing for me is go back to that point about he hasn't been flawless. Don't get me wrong. He put his first kick out against Monaghan into the stand, and he hooked one into the terrace side last night. But his response to both was really impressive. He dealt with, I mean, balls dropping in short. He's dealt with that really well. He's come off his line. He's been really good in possession. So it is. I, a lot of people might look at it and think, is this an area that Galway have concern for Galway? I actually think they're in a position now where they're looking at this like a strength. We've got two really good options. The one thing I would say, regardless of if they go with Conor Gleeson or Conor Farty, and again, McGrath is currently injured, but uh, you don't want to be chopping and changing throughout championship. I think
Yeah.
I just don't think it's healthy for lads to be looking over their shoulder and to have that kind of fear that I'm only one step away from being dropped or from coming off or whatever. So I do think if there was a bit of whoever you pick, kind of back them and see if they can get that run. But based on the last look, and maybe this is a recency bias, and Conor Gleeson's bank of work over the couple of seasons will stand to him. But based over the last two games, I think Conor Farty is in the driving seat.
It does seem like the keeper, obviously, at the moment, is going to come down to between Gleeson and Flaherty. Even going by the back six in the last two games, if everyone's fit, maybe it picks itself. Tierney and Mayer at the moment probably picks itself if everyone's fit there. Uh, Darcy obviously in the half forward line, and then Robert Finnerty. Are the other four positions up for grabs? Because obviously Oisin McDonagh has played the last few games, but he did make one or two, um, I suppose, games through the bench. Phil McDonagh hasn't featured at all, really since the Donegal game. Paul Conroy's came on. Then you look at Shane McGrath, Ryan Roach, even Kieran Malloy playing yesterday. Do you feel like maybe apart from Darcy and Finnerty, the other four positions are up for grabs?
I think so. I do. I stand over my point. I do think there's a bit of flexibility that might come with that back six now as well, depending on that idea of horses for courses. No more than Sean McKern and his performance at the weekend, or Sean Fitzgerald has a lot of credit in the bank in terms of what he's done as well. Um, and to your point, I think to me it's not four positions that are up, it's three. Like when Matthew Thompson will be back after a Connacht semi final and he slots right back into 11. I know that's a
Straight
lot to ask.
away.
I think so, yeah. Given I think there's talk right about some of the GPS scores he's been sending back since he went away. I think and in fairness, Galway did it with Keane Hernan when he came. Keane Hernan was beside me celebrating on a pitch for a kind of final, and a week later was playing in a group stages Samoa series game. So they get lads back in pretty fast if they're up to speed. So I could see a world where Matthew Thompson comes as soon as he's back and available, he comes back into the team. And then it depends on what you're doing beyond that. I'd say a small frustration, and I'm just purely speculating here now, by the way, but I'd say a small frustration for Galway is I wonder was a part of their plan to have a look at Paul Conroy inside in the last two games, but given what happened in games, they didn't have that luxury. So, for example, if Sean Kelly and Matthew Tierney both get injured and then they have to take off Kieran Malloy, now suddenly you need Paul Conroy maybe closer to the middle. Whereas I wonder was there a world in which the plan was actually get him in for Roach and to see what he's like for 20 minutes in closer to goal. So I think there might be a world when we definitely see Paul Conroy inside at some point, which would be a pretty exciting prospect. And then yeah, it depends on obviously the other lads' availability. But I mean, if Gilly McDaid is fully fit and in peak fitness, he's starting in this team. There's no question about that. And the same thing is true for Shane Walsh and Damien Comer, obviously, if they're in a world where that's the case. So I could see a bit of flux in the Galway team over the last couple of weeks, and I don't think that's a bad thing. It's a good thing that you have a bit of depth and maybe a couple of different options for those sort of positions.
We obviously expect Galway to get to a Connacht final, considering obviously playing Sligo or Leitrim and they're further down the line than obviously both of those teams. This is ideal in one sense, though, if you're Mayo or Roscommon and maybe Galway decide to throw a spanner in the works and put Paul Conroy on the edge of the square in the Connacht final.
Yeah, and I can absolutely see a world where that is a live prospect. Particularly even look, I think all these teams are in a very interesting run here, and they've got a break that I'd say was probably no harm necessarily for Roscommon or Mayo. I'm sure it was obvious by their selection that they're not in a league final, and I think a big factor. Not going to admit this publicly. I do think a big factor in what Roscommon and Mayo did last weekend is they're worried about you've taken in the context of both of them now, they're taking two bad beatings in the league. But just think about it from Mayo perspective, two bad beatings, you're into Croke Park again. If you take a third there, now your confidence is really shaky, and you just don't want that going into a championship. So I can see why maybe it suited them not to be, why they'd be fairly satisfied to not be in a league final, let's say. And then to answer your question about Paul Conroy, yeah, it would be an absolute complete spanner in the works. They did. I'd be adamant about this. They did experiment with it briefly last year, especially against Tyrone in Tuam. I thought Paul Conroy was in closer to goal. I think he actually did he catch a mark that day. So yeah, I can see a world where they would want to get something out of him in that position. And I'd say, like I said, I think maybe in an ideal world they would have been able to see it in the league, but circumstances dictated that it wasn't an option.
Uh, it's April 25th, and the Connacht semi-final for Galway is fixed for if it's Sligo, it's in Pearse Stadium, and if it's Leitrim, it's in Park Mark Diarmida in Carrick-on-Shannon. That game scheduled for half 3. Um, how do you see the next few weeks looking for Galway? Is it maybe even if you look back to Sligo a few years ago in Markievicz Park, and you think obviously Sligo are favourites to beat Leitrim at the minute, does that sort of focus the mind straight away for Galway?
To a point, yeah. I'd say they'll take a week. They'll take a break, and maybe this is a week now where they've got a really good bank of all the data, and they can do a deep dive on that, and maybe a couple of individual sessions with certain players to get them up to speed. And then it's, as I say, it's trying to evolve ever so slightly and maybe spend some time working on their attack, which I'm sure will be a big focus over the next couple of weeks. And on top of that, then trying to get a couple of these injuries cleared up and develop the squad all the more. So they'll have this down to a fine art this next run. And there's a very smart management set up there. And I wouldn't, hard for all of us on the outside to necessarily know his impact. I wouldn't sleep on what Darragh Sheridan is doing in terms of maybe a bit of clarity and drilling into lads, and it would sound like all right, yeah, if he's asking you a question, he's coming with 10 more, and you better have your answers ready. And I think that sort of stuff is actually healthy. It's good to make sure that teams are on edge and are turning up and feel like they're part of that kind of high performance environment and all that good stuff. So I think they're in a pretty good place now. They're building steadily towards that kind of semi final, all the while kind of knowing in their minds that this run now is where you really want to step it up a gear.
Obviously, before we finish up, we are obviously both in tune last week at the 20s game. A victory for Galway over Roscommon in the opening round of the championship there. Um, Obviously, Kevin Johnson gets off to a winning start. 310 to 111 victory for Galway. They now play Leitrim in round two in Clune on Wednesday evening at 7 o'clock there. That victory has just set up Kevin Johnson and his side now perfectly in this championship, hasn't it?
It definitely has, but I would say I presume I said it to you at the time, but I think Kevin Johnson was a really good appointment by the county board. They got that one down, and I mean, I wouldn't have been one bit surprised if there was a bit of interest from other counties in look at the pedigree he's had, and he's involved in he's won county titles in every single county bar one in Connacht, I'm pretty sure. So he's got an unbelievable track record. But more than that, just his at that grade and his ability to work with lads and his understanding with the senior setup and myself and yourself would have been there for the media scrum afterwards and asked him about maybe the access to some of the lads, and he was just I heard Barry talk about this last week as well. Just gave a really mature and smart answer about it and spoke about all the positives that come from them being to the senior setup and is not pining after them or makes the most of what he has. So I thought that was a really good appointment and a really good note to start it on. The most encouraging thing for me is maybe the level of maturity in a couple of the big players for them. I think of a guy like Kieran Mulhern gave what to me was just a really kind of sophisticated, smart performance that day. And it wasn't trying to be the leading light and be at the end of every move. Was facilitating around him, working really hard defensively. Actually, just gave a really intelligent performance. I thought Michael Ryan did a very similar thing as well. And geez, I felt for Kieran Mulhern. Like Kieran Mulhern was an inch away from kicking an outrageous score on Sunday again. That kind of stuff would be pretty encouraging. Roscommon, I'm sure, would be pointing after a lot of the missed chances they had in the same game, but it sets up. I mean, this suddenly the run for that 20 team is looking pretty good. So it wouldn't have been I don't think there would have been huge hopes around this crop or anything like that. There's a lot of very good players there, but not necessarily. But then you look at a game like that, and you just look at the talent that's there right across the board. And Roscommon started that game very well. Shane McGlinchey took his goal extremely well. So Keane Mitchell, I thought after the start was thundered into the game and was really outstanding. So there's a lot of performances there that they would have been pretty encouraged by. And yeah, I think they're in a pretty good place, I have to say.
Wasn't it more so the players that came under the radar I thought were really good. Like you mentioned Ross Cohn there, he obviously played centre half forward, but thought Richard McGrath and Keane Mitchell in the half back line really good too. Even the ground Matthew O'Donnell covered and was actually crucial in setting up Shea for that goal. Even Matthew Collins, I know we're both talking on Wednesday night. He wasn't a player to feature for Clare Galway seniors last year and finishing up at 1-2.
And yeah, and that's a really good point, and again a good reflection of a setup. But I would say the point too, like the way this stuff should work. If you want a pathway, you mentioned Keane Mitchell. Keane Mitchell didn't play Galway minor, went into a tune setup last year, was outstanding, was one of their best players in the championship run. Went down to UL, played freshers football there. I don't know if you got a look at that squad. It is a stacked.
Mm.
I mean, it is a stacked freshers team, and he was starting in that team as well. It's only natural that you would evolve that on, and you see the performance that he gave last weekend. Again, go back to that level of maturity. Matthew Collins wasn't forcing it. He kind of was looking for even at the. I don't know if you remember the kick inside from Michael Ryan, an absolutely outrageous pass, by the way. But his movement for that was he wasn't breaking out to a wing and winning a hard ball or breaking away from goal. It was very kind of clever in terms of understanding if I can win this centrally, it is on for me here. So all of that would be really encouraging. They still have, like any 20 team, they still have a whole lot of things to clear up, and I'm sure that they'll have the frustrations about. From what I gather, McDonough has a very serious hamstring injury, and I'm sure that would be a sore one from the take because there would have been a lot of hopes about a guy like that. But yeah, overall, I think they'll be reasonably content with that. There was a right good start, and they, at a minimum now they can start to think that there's you asked the question afterwards, and I thought Kevin Johnson answered that well. I mean, their ambition is obvious, and why shy away from it? They want to win a Connacht title, and it'll be a formidable task. Particularly, you look how talented that Mayo squad are, but this grade can be funny, and if you can get on a run, who knows what can happen.
It's obviously a quick turnaround for Leitrim, but to get a victory, it's two from two, and then a bye to come.
Yeah, and that's what I mean. I think that was why it was so important to start the way that it started. And I wouldn't, despite the fact that Roscommon missed what they missed. I mean, it is still. I was looking at this last week. I think Roscommon are the only Connacht team without a single player part of the senior setup, and I'd say that's because Keane Smith and Mark Dowd have a prior relationship, and maybe there was a bit of understanding there from the senior side. So they were have put a lot into this grade and will still have huge ambitions about what they can do there. So in that context, it was a big result to get. Galway were somebody told me I was walking up the gate. Galway actually were underdogs in that game as well. So to get it out the way they did was pretty impressive. And like I said, yeah, if you can get over the next one now, the run does fall pretty well. Like you'd be pretty satisfied with the at a minimum the schedule.
The Miners as well got their campaign off to win 218 to 1-9 winners over Leitrim. I actually asked Cosy Gilmore after the game about the under 17 grade, um, and I suppose how he found it with, I suppose, these players being 15, 16-year-olds. I thought his answer was really interesting. He said 19% of what we do is emphasis on skills.
And I mean that's Cosy 101. I mean, and I look, he would know this. He would know a lot of these players prior from Ted Webb. He knows the. I mean, there's three Barneymen involved in that coaching setup with Eddie Ford coaching and James Kane doing goalkeeping coaching as well. And for the record, he's 100% right. Like that is ultimately you're trying to refine that as the air gets thinner, and that's what you happen is are you able to execute when the walls are closing in? So much of it, you more games you watch now, you just see brilliant moves break down because of a mistimed hand pass or players not having a weaker side. So the fact that he's talking that way is completely right. So I thought it was funny. Both Kevin Johnson and Cosy Gilmore were asked in the last week or so what exactly is the grade for. And if you boil it down to just an ultra simplistic level, they both give similar answers. Like Kevin Johnson said, it's we're trying to make that step up a bit more manageable and prep lads for what's coming down the tracks. And not all of them are going to be able to make that step. But if you rise or, rising tide lifts all boats. If you rise the level and they all benefit from that environment, that's all you can ask.
Yeah, it was interesting too because obviously there's a bit of expectation with this minor team. Obviously, last year, winning
Yeah.
the under 16s Ted Webb and beating Kerry in such comfortable fashion in that game. But even looking back at that victory, Oshino Naughton in midfield from Mayo Branks is a player to be excited about. But I actually didn't realise that Dara Kelly wasn't with them at all last year from Killannon, and the two of them really looked like they're forming a really impressive midfield partnership there.
Yeah, there's something in the water in Clan, and they've an unbelievable ability to produce no more than that 19s team last year as well that were particularly stacked as well. They've got a whole host of very talented young lads coming through the tracks. To go back to what Cosy said as well, it's like ultimately it's a development grade, like it is, and it's even a more exaggerated development grade given the change in from 18s to 17s. But as a whole, I think what Galway did with their appointments here are pretty clever. And there's not a huge amount of 16-year-olds involved in that setup for understandable reasons as well. I think the lads would know what they had there, and there's kind of a long-term prospect about all this sort of stuff. So a couple of reasons there that you would be cautiously optimistic.
Yeah, it's going to be a fair step up though, isn't it? Like even the Leitrim game for them last weekend, like they went out and raced into a 1-7 to no lead after 23 minutes. Leitrim obviously come back, but like they never looked like losing that one. He's even referencing the points after the game that 10 of Roscommon's team are minors from last year, so there's going to be a fair step up.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I suppose that's part like that's baked into the cake too. That it's part of what you would expect is there naturally in all this sort of things in terms of long term you're just stepping up whether it be game by game or the fact that it might be from an opposition perspective as well will do them no harm. But all you can do, Paul, is you hope that you get that bright start and you hope that that's a platform for something to build on. And I think ironically all three teams have that now. They've established a nice little bedrock there, something that they can build on for what's coming down the track, which is inevitably going to be a level up again.
Just before we finish, Morris, club leagues have obviously started up over the last few weeks. I don't know about you, but I've enjoyed going to all these club games, particularly. figuring out who's been featuring for each club in the early parts of the year, and that's fantastic for club players too to have games already this time of year.
It is. A small bugbear in mind. Part of me does think would we be better getting rid of the just one less game. I know you don't want to take games off club players, but if there was one less game, so the semi-final or the relegation playoff for the final four, and you saved around there, and you would start
Mm.
this maybe slightly a week later, and then that's every team is not coming back down for until a minimum of February, and your season would probably run until October, and I think it would be just be a bit small, bit cleaner as a schedule. That said, lads are chomping at the bit and delighted to be back. And you saw some very good and competitive games last weekend. Even I know you were at Barna and down, but just from a competitive perspective, and to get a game and pitches are hard to get, was particularly interesting. I we've spoken privately about this. There was a lot of talk about my question to Park Joyce about making lads available, but I think a lot of managers say that they do this sort of stuff, or maybe claim they do it once and then don't do it again. But there's one thing to walk the walk. There's another thing to talk the talk, and it was definitely good to see the lads in the outside of the 26 playing games last weekend, and Charlie Power kicked an absolutely outrageous 2-pointer for Southill when he was playing there, and that'll do him no harm. And from what I gather, Roach was outstanding for against Owen for Callanan, and surprise, surprise, he comes into a game last weekend and does what's asked of him. So all of that was pretty encouraging to see those a whole host of lads playing in those games. So yeah, it definitely good to have it back, and another pretty entertaining round coming down the tracks this weekend as well.
Yeah, and obviously Patrick Egan playing Saturday as well, before Galway's game against Dublin. So great to see extended players playing for the clubs at the weekend just gone by too. But that's all we do have time for on today's show. Thanks for coming on, Marsh.
Anytime, but.